This is a private meeting that took place in the Kremlin about a month ago between Vladimir Putin and select business leaders in Russia. We do not know who those business leaders were. We only really have 4 minutes of opening remarks that were published on the Kremlin's website to go off of. And yet, what happened behind closed doors later may have given us the best insight into the Kremlin's thinking on the war in a long time. Today, we are going to focus on a report from Reuters titled, "Putin Growing Concerned by Russia's Economy as Trump Pushes for Ukraine Deal," because I cannot remember reading 1,300 more important words this year. The piece cites 5 anonymous sources with knowledge of the situation. Now, as you might imagine, that covers a pretty broad class of people. It could mean individuals inside of the Kremlin who are interacting with Putin on a daily basis and who are annoyed with the situation there, and apparently do not care that they are risking their lives to talk to Western journalists. It could be some of those faceless business leaders who were at that meeting, with heads turned away from the camera, and who are also upset at the situation, and also do not care that they are risking their lives to talk to Western journalists. It could be associates of those business leaders who heard the business leaders complain secondhand, gossip travels, and then reported it to Western journalists. At least they are far enough removed from the situation that they are less likely to face danger by doing so. Or it could be US intelligence officials who are getting their information from one of those Russian sources, and the sources may or may not be aware that they are conspiring with the United States. It is worth reminding everyone that the CIA had nailed the Kremlin's intentions at the beginning of the war, which indicates there was likely someone on the inside back then, and they may still be there. Finally, it is always a possibility that this is some sort of stratagem, that the Kremlin wanted this information to be public for whatever reason, and both Reuters and myself, and, well, now you, dear listener, are all going along for the ride. Regardless, there is growing consternation within the Russian oligarch class about the war, and that sentiment is starting to weigh on the Kremlin's mind. To understand what's going on here, we need to go back to a recent video I did over on the main channel. You should watch it now if you have not, because it covers where the domestic cracks are and are not within Russia. But here is the short version. It is tempting to say that Russian soldiers are those most likely to foment a rebellion against the Kremlin. After all, they are the ones fighting and dying in Ukraine. And that was true following the mobilization announcement seen here back in the fall of 2022. But the Kremlin shifted away from this type of mobilization precisely because it was so unpopular. Instead, the Kremlin has turned to market wage contracts to recruit soldiers. So those still going to Ukraine are happy to take the risk for what is, at least from their perspective, a large sum of money. Others of working age in the country are also doing very well. The Ministry of Defense contracts for soldiers, plus increased demand for materiel to fight the war, has caused a labor shortage. Salaries have correspondingly shot up, and those individuals working have made real wage gains despite inflation. Instead, the current major losers of the war come from the oligarch class. They are suffering from watching their rubles plummet in value, their inability to export products to Western countries to make a lot of money, and the inability to make profitable investments at all at the moment. As a result, if I fell asleep for a week and then woke up to learn that Putin had been removed from power, my guess would be that it was a coup originating from the oligarch class, those same people at the aforementioned meeting. With all that as background, the article cites 2 of the sources as saying that a section of the Russian elite would find a negotiated settlement desirable. Now, our first principles already told us that, so we did not really need the article to tell us such. But it is still nice to have that confirmation. What is more interesting is that this seems to be moving Putin's opinion regarding the end of the war. Specifically, that he believes that Russia's key war goals have been met. To be clear, I do not expect this to mean that Russia is about to withdraw. Rather, he sees that NATO is unlikely to admit Ukraine for the foreseeable future. That is a fair conclusion to draw, given that NATO expansion requires unanimous consent from those in the alliance. Hungary and Turkey stand in the way as veto players. Germany is not in favor of it. Biden tried to quell any thoughts on the subject, and now Trump is president of the United States. Meanwhile, Russia has connected the land bridge to Crimea, in addition to this artificial one. And there have been substantial gains in the Donbas region as well. All of that is to say that Putin may not be interested in pushing much further, given the military difficulty of the last 6 months of offensive action, and the political constraints at home. And with that, we can now return to the December 16th meeting that began today's video. The business leaders reportedly petitioned Putin to ease up on interest rates. You see, the higher that they go, the harder that it is to make upfront investments now to grow the economy and make a large profit later. The problem here is that the oligarchs' preferred policy runs against the Russian central bank's strategy to curb inflation. High interest rates encourage people to keep their money in the bank, thereby reducing demand and keeping prices in check. The strategy has given Governor of the Central Bank Elvira Nabiullina a fighting chance in saving Russia's economy. But it appears that Putin is starting to see the oligarchs as a potential threat. During his end-of-the-year roundtable, he pushed back against expectations that the Russian Central Bank, a nominally independent organization, should continue to raise interest rates. This is despite how freezing rates primarily benefits the oligarchs, and the roundtable is designed to be for the large public audience. Anyway, one day later, Nabiullina announced that the central bank would not raise interest rates, despite market expectations that they would go up by 2 percentage points. And that continues to be the Kremlin's messaging, now seen here from a January 2nd economic planning meeting. As a result, inflation is likely going to get worse for Russia. But the fact that Putin prefers to go against the macroeconomic recommendation indicates that the oligarchs now present a non-zero threat to the Kremlin. Essentially, Putin needs to borrow back some of the political capital from the working class by scaling down some of their real wage gains. To close out, and now moving on from the article, this has important implications for how the Trump administration is planning to coerce Russia. Additional sanctions have returned to the conversation. For the most part, these would constrain the Russian government's income by closing off workarounds that allow Russian goods to escape to the world market. And shrinking Russia's budget would be helpful in any circumstance. The problem from earlier is that bringing extra pain to Russian workers will always be difficult, as long as factory demand is at sky-high levels. They just make too much money domestically. In turn, trying to target them at this point is a losing battle. That could change if there were another mobilization announcement, but at least as far as we can see right now, we're very far away from that. The good news for the United States is that those sanctions will hurt Russia's big business interests at a time when they are upset, and the Kremlin is worried enough to change its behavior in that light. Meanwhile, I am not changing my behavior. These 2 wonderful books are a great way to end any video, main channel or otherwise. Check the video description for more information about them. And if you enjoyed this video, please like, share, and subscribe, and I will see you next time. Take care.